All right. Well, hello again, everybody. Welcome to the open mic. This is Rich Ehisen, your intrepid host. If you're a regular visitor or a newbie, you know this is where every week or so I sit down with an author and talk about their work and the writing and publishing industry, and hopefully share some insights that'll help you discover new writers and to also learn a little something about how the game is played in this day and age. I'm really fortunate today. I'm joined by environmental writer, scientist, intrepid naturalist, Rebecca Lawton. How are you doing today, Ms. Lawton?
I'm very well, Rich. How are you doing?
Good. Did I describe you accurately? First of all, we didn't talk about that beforehand. So, are you comfortable with the way I described you?
Yeah, that all sounded good. I wanted to add to that a lot of my writing has come from my work as a longtime river guide. So that's one thing I would add.
Outstanding. We're going to get into that. Believe me, I have questions about some of your very eclectic career and how that impacts your writing. So I promise you, we are going to get to that in just a moment. But let me start first with you have a new book that's going to be coming out here shortly in September, I believe. I think September 17th, if I'm not mistaken, which happens to be my wedding anniversary. So I will not forget
Oh,
that's the
correct.
release
Yeah.
date. Swimming Grand Canyon and Other Poems. Please tell me and the folks watching, tell us a little bit about your new book.
Well, Swimming Grand Canyon, thanks for asking about it. Yeah, it's a chapbook, very short book, 35 pages. And the poetry in it has been collected over many years of my writing poetry. And during the pandemic, I sat down with the poems. I saw a contest and I said, well, just pull these together and see what there is. And I had been wanting to write a book called Swimming Grand Canyon because it's such a deep experience to swim a bunch of it, not always by choice. And I had the title poem I had written already and had published about Georgie White Clark, the first woman to work as a longtime commercial river guide. And I had read her interviews and she said swimming Grand Canyon was a way of life for her, which got me thinking about writing this book. So that's how it all kind of came together.
Well, I was going to ask you this later, but we've already mentioned it now a little bit, so let's get into it now because I have done a little bit of rafting, so a little bit of whitewater rafting, always as the person who is not leading anything, totally a passenger, but always had tremendous admiration for river guides and the herding of the cats to some extent with newbies like me, and just the skill and the attitude and the love of what they were doing. And most of it's only been here in Northern California. Of course, you were in the Grand Canyon on the Colorado, which is a vastly different thing than what I've experienced. And also in there, you're also a fluvial geologist, which I know you're not doing that job anymore, but you did for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very different things than being a writer. So I'm just curious, tell me a little bit more about each of those jobs and how they may be impacted, your writing and not just how you write, but the kind of writing that you do.
Well, really good question. And thank you for those comments about river guides. I completely agree. I just went on my first commercial river trip ever, I think, and was very impressed with the young people doing the work. And it is hard work. And the skill set is very unique. So my career as a guide started in Northern California on the Stanislaus River, which I don't know, Rich, if you were fortunate enough to run before the dam. But that's where I first went down the river, and the river seemed to bring a lot of things together for me. I was passionate about doing something with science and math, and at the same time, I was charting a course as a musician at the time, and had been excelling in musical things for some years and thought that I would just take a little time off on the, doing this river guide job and then return to music. But in falling in love with the river and having that science bent as well, I wanted to know as much about it as I could possibly learn. And fluvial geology was what spoke to me. That's the study of actually the transport of sediment in water. And when we run a river, we're sediment because we're pieces of, we're particles being transported by water. So it all these things kind of came together through my love of the river. And I think that because I never made it back to music as a profession, that artistic bent then got translated into actually starting with poetry writing, because I had been songwriting, and the teacher said, these are poems. He didn't say drop music or anything, but I got very into the words, very, very much into the words. And the fluvial geology gave me this whole vocabulary that I don't know. I think that it's hard for some of us, at least for me, to kind of block out everything and do one thing forever. I mean, I wish I were that kind of a person, but I didn't turn out to be. So all these things fed each other. But you're right; they called on different parts of myself and my different skill sets, and I think writing is what has risen to the top at this point of my life. Just because I had to put it off for so long when I was a geologist and working with spreadsheets and looking into microscopes, and I was thinking, I got an idea for a story, and now I've got the time to do that. So that's what's remaining in my career life.
I will tell you too, and this isn't a question, which I guess I'll get to a question in a second, but your writing is beautiful. It's so clean and
Thank you.
clear. It's crisp. It's powerful in that you convey such beautiful imagery, but it never falls into being flowery or overly sentimental. I mean, it's very clear that you have great knowledge and great passion about this subject matter, but it's still there's a great sparseness is not the right word, and I've been thinking, what is the word here that fits, and I can't really think of the right word, but it's just very clean and crisp, and it just flows so beautifully. Which I suppose when you're writing about water, that's maybe that's the best analogy.
Oh.
I'm just curious though. Because it is so profound in its way. Did you always want to be a writer? Is this born out of something that was always there, or is this something you came to a little bit later and decided, no, I actually like this too?
Oh, that's another great question. Well, when I was working, I think it was my second year as a river guide, and I was studying at the University of California, Santa Cruz in geology, and I picked up Wallace Stegner's Angle of Repose. And I was reading it while I was on an internship, and I saw how he brought together all this knowledge of engineering and engineering geology, and then historical research that he did. And I saw that he had pulled together a lot of the threads that I was starting to pick up in my life. And so when I read that book, I thought, I would like to do this. Here's someone who's mastered this. How did he do this? And again, though I had given up music professionally, I knew that some kind of a creative life was my life more than a science life. And so I thought, that's when I started keeping journals, very, daily journals of river culture, river observations that I thought, this is a point, this is a space in time that I'm a woman in this profession. I'm seeing things from a different angle than I know some of the people around me are seeing it from. And I'd love to be able to chronicle this life, and if I could do it like Stegner has done, pulling together these ideas, and these streams of knowledge, um, I then I feel like that would be, I don't know, paying homage to everything I'm learning. And so yes, early on, I knew I wanted to write, and it just wasn't really clear at that moment how what genre it would take, or even how I would learn to do it, you know?
So you're self-taught.
Well, I did go get a master's in fine arts in creative writing at Mills College.
Right,
Um,
right. Of course, all right.
and
Right. I should backtrack. Thinking of how I asked that question. I know you had the MFA. I was thinking though in the beginning, you essentially inspired yourself, and your original writings were all things that you were. It sounds like you were teaching yourself as you went along, and then later on you refined it through your MFA. Is that an accurate description?
I think that's a really good way to put it. And I think the MFA was a stepping stone. I know that I came out with my degree going, okay, great. I'm at the culmination of my career, but it was really just a start. It was a stepping stone. And all those, I don't know, I've always been kind of a solo person. Um, not smart enough to ask people the right questions, so I'm just always figuring it out. It takes longer, I think. But it's been how I learn. I learn on a job. Yes, I got a great education, a couple of wonderful colleges, and then I've had wonderful mentors too, um, fortunately. But yeah, I think it's like when I worked on the river. A lot of the people who worked on the river came off of these white water schools where they had the privilege of riding along with some really great teachers and boatmen who were articulate in talking about how things worked. And I never did that. I just got the job and figured it out and made a lot of mistakes. So, uh, so I write about the mistakes a lot, but I have to say that my career wasn't just one mistake after another. It's just that those are good writing points.
Well, it is true. I think I'm very much the same way. I usually will learn by doing things and screwing them up 4 or 5 times, and then I don't know if I perfect anything, but I get better at it, right? So that I'm not, you know, I compare it to cooking. I'm a very much a self-taught cook, and I do all the cooking in this family, and almost everything that comes out really good had at least 3 to 4 epic failures before it
Yeah.
becomes a staple now, and people go, "Oh, this is so good." I'm like, "Yeah, well, if you'd have seen the first half dozen times I made it, you would never come into my house again."
Oh, that's great. I love that story.
But
Yeah.
well, again, I was going to ask this a little later, but you brought it up because um, so I want to ask it now, which is, we are at a time where we're reflecting a lot more than we have in the past on issues of inclusion and diversity, and trying to, at least more of us are trying to be more aware of the lines in the sand that we have intentionally or unintentionally drawn around a lot of things, but a lot of professions. And going back to what I said earlier, I've done the Merced, and I've done a lot of the forest American rivers, so not a ton of those things, but I just thinking about it, realize how many of the really good guided trips I have been on were with female guides, female river guides, but that culture is well, I don't have to tell you, that culture is probably not you know always so welcoming to women, and it's kind of a bro culture. It's a very different kind of culture than what a lot of people maybe think. And So I just find it really interesting when, somebody like yourself does it for as long as you did, and in that environment, you really have to get a lot of trust from people who probably maybe get on, oh, a woman's guiding our boat today, or whatever might be going on. And like I say, hopefully we're getting past all that. But um, how maybe do we keep bringing more diversity to these fields, and extrapolating that to getting more people like yourself to write about them, getting more female voices, not just to be part of it, but to do what you've done and share those experiences and bring it out to the wider world through books or articles or any kind of writing.
Yeah, wow, that's
It's a long-winded question. I'm sorry, but
no, it's a complex, you've asked a lot of things in one very, thoughtful question. And so I'm going to try to address them, the pieces as I see them. I have no idea why I was drawn to well, not just one job, but, a couple of jobs that were um, male, you know, preferential, when I entered them. And that, it wasn't my intention to say, I'm going to try to find the hardest environments I can and then see if I can be good. But that's what ended up happening. That's what ended up being my experience in the the geology field, as well as river guiding. And then, when I was in music, I picked an instrument that wasn't played by that many women, and that wasn't. I just liked the way it sounded. It wasn't my intention to be the only woman in the French horn, section. But these are things I stumbled upon, and as I spent time in each of those environments, I noticed, and this is, as you pointed out, with Black Lives Matter and the efforts to include people in the experience of being alive on this planet. Um, there's been a big focus on language. Let's not call BIPOC people by these old names that aren't accurate. Let's refine this. And we people who are called these things want this refinement of language that includes us. And that's what, the more I write about the subject of rivers and river guiding, river culture, the more I feel frustration about how non-inclusive the language is around the experience. And so as long as we're talking about the experience in an old way, we're keeping the people who have actually pushed, like myself, who've actually pushed boundaries. We're not seeing that. We're not acknowledging that. It's an erasure of that experience. Like, I'm not going to name the name of the book that sells the most about the river experience through the outfitter I used to work for. And I know this because I'm in touch with people still working there. And they say that this book is the one everyone wants to buy. It doesn't matter who the person is, they want to buy this book. And it makes me sad every time I hear that, because I think it's a good book. But when I read it, I was angered. It was talking about an experience in a time that I was part of, and it used very non-inclusive language. And so I actually wrote to the magazine that first published installments of the book. I said, hey, women were there. I was standing on that ridge watching that thing happen that's described in the book, and all I see are the men. Why? What's up with that? Why are we doing that still? And I'm with you, Rich. The the men and the women on this trip I just took, there were more women on the crew than men. Now, they were working on a river, the Green River, where I was the only guide who was a woman anywhere I looked, and so here's a crew that's got skilled women on it, and they're kind of doing it like, this is no big deal, and I'm going, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. You guys, this is a really good thing that you're doing, and you're doing it so well. And I just want to acknowledge that, and I want our culture to acknowledge women in these places. And language, and this is why I write this stuff, is when we're inclusive, we're seeing it, we're acknowledging it. When we say, oh, that's just how we talk about things, we're killing people. It's like, John Wesley Powell, the first big white guy to go down the Colorado River with on the U.S. Geological Survey ticket. It was all men. It was none of them had any river experience. They were hitting sandbars. They were destroying boats all over, left and right. They were just learning as they went, and then it had grave consequences. They lost most of their food, and they were half starving by the time they got to the big drops, and when you see the famous pictures of John Wesley Powell, he's often standing with the Paiute chief, a big man in his culture. And for the longest time, the photos always just said native guy and John Wesley Powell, the chief of the U.S. Geological Survey. And they never named this fellow, they never named this Paiute chief. And he was an honored indigenous elder. And now you see, oh, they found out what his name was and they put it on the photo. I want my name in the books. I want the women I worked with to be named in the books. I don't want to be a footnote in the best-selling book about the river. And I don't think women should be. So I think language is our way in, and language is a game changer. It is.
Well, that's a great point and a great answer to, like I said, somewhat of a convoluted question. I didn't mean to make it that convoluted, but I asked that question. I'm married to a civil engineer. I am surrounded by engineers and technical people in my life, friends, and two brothers-in-law, and I've thought a lot of that same thing for a long time, because my wife's a fairly high-placed person in her organization, and there's never once been a man that has led this organization. A woman that has led this organization, and she may or may not be that person, but I think about these things because I think, and I agree with you about language, and it is one of those inherent things that maybe people. Even, I'm 57 years old, so I grew up with it, right? And I think about I think about my daughter who's 34, and I think about when she reads something, does it stand out to her that she does not see the women noted? Do we not know? Because we don't do it throughout history very well. We tend to note women in history who have what we might call some kind of sordid thing, right? There's always something that they can point to. We don't really celebrate women in history the way we celebrate men. And so, again, long-winded way of saying, I think what you said is pretty profound, because I do think it does matter a lot, which is why books like yours matter a lot. It's just because if it inspires even a small number of probably younger women to do the things that you've done, whether they ever write about it or not, just to go do them, because they actually do see that there's a role for them there. And it's not a complimentary role. They're not there to be the support system for somebody. They're there because they're part of it. And so that's one of the things I notice as I read your writing, is that this, there is not a bifurcation like that. There's something that's very inclusive there.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm writing memoir now, and my first memoir, Reading Water, Lessons from the River, didn't really tackle the gender issue. It was just stories. It was just essays about mostly the river as a hydrological being. But then the more I saw that there wasn't much of a balance in books about river culture, the more I knew I'd better write this journey I was on, at least while I still remember some of it.
Right.
And it is more inclusive of the new way, the new language we have for the gendered journey. The words weren't there when I was starting out. I just knew something was happening. I went, wait a minute, that guy just told me, he just called me a cook, and I'm actually leading the trip, and it's with the new tools that we have to describe these things, I think I'm seeing it more clearly now, and I think I'm way more mature. I can talk about these things without making it about the anger, but making it about the actual experience. People can have their own reaction to it. Yes, I was angry a lot of the time. Yes, it was a difficult journey, and it didn't make me a happy person in the end, but I am now, and I can see it a little more clearly, and in part because there's a lot of great writing coming out from younger women who have been studying the gendered experience of being in a man's world, and learning how to describe it. So I'm learning from them, and I'm going to say, well, this is what I did. This was an experience where the men were great and the men were assholes, and there were women who were assholes, and and I was an asshole, and it's sort of like, let's see if we can just tell the story.
Right, the whole story. I mean, you're very clearly passionate about conservation and particularly about rivers. And tell me a bit about that passion. And because you've made it very clear, you believe, the rivers, the story of the rivers is very much the story of people. And it's really important for us to know that story. Tell me a little bit more about your feelings in that regard, and again, how it's informed your writing.
Wow, I had the experience, like a lot of my colleagues in the river community, of falling for a river that was doomed before we even met it, and that was the Stanislaus River, a Sierra Nevada stream that flowed into, the San Joaquin, and then into um, the out to San Francisco Bay, and so it was a big part of the California water scene at the time. It was the last river to be dammed under the Central Water Project that had been it was antiquated by the time the Stanislaus was dammed, and so it was a very personal journey for me, and I know for others, that we met this place, we fell in love with it, we became adults on it, we learned a profession on it, and we met each other on it, and we still are, a community. And so this thing that we loved and felt personally attached to was taken from us, and it was taken for no reason. It's been the worst dam I know of in the California river system to deliver on the promises that were made in damming it. So with this very personal wound, that we all came away with, there are many, many people who trained on this Stanislaus like I did, who became lifelong conservationists. And so I felt it was necessary to write about that experience of having, especially as a young person, I think it was in my first year of college when this all happened, or maybe second. And we're so impressionable at that age. And I know I really believed that the world was going to become a better place for wild rivers rather than a worse place, and what wild rivers can give us as people. I mean, there's so much demand for space like that, and there's so little of it compared to what we need. So, so I think that through that experience, that very personal experience, and because it was like growing up with a class of people who were likewise affected, um, it it sort of became foundational, I think, for us all as we went off into other lives. Whether a person became an outfitter and then continued to teach their passion for the river as an outfitter, and there were men and women who've done that, or like Julie Munger on with her whitewater training, safety training, that she teaches people how to be safe. She's really up the bar on the quality of what goes on, and it's all around this love for the river and this awareness of how loss can happen for no good reason. It's like any loss. It's like there's no, like everyone dies, but we don't know how, we don't know when, and it all seems senseless. And this seems like a senseless loss to all of us. So, or to many of us. Some people, I think, just moved on, didn't care, if they were involved in building the dam, and then take the money and run. But I don't know if that answered the question very well.
Sure, it does, of course. I do want to touch though, because you also have one novel among all your books are nonfiction except the one novel, which of course dealt with water and with the river. And um, I'm curious if you have any more plans to write any more fiction, or was that experience a one and done?
Oh, I think it's great you're asking that, because I do have a collection of short stories out. It's out of print right now. But right now, in fact, only moments before I joined you here, I'm working on climate fiction now. And I was just so deeply in the world of this high desert groundwater thing that I'm writing fiction about now, that I looked up at the time and went, oh my God, it's so, yes, I'm writing fiction. I do have another novel. It's not published. It needs a rewrite. But I think this climate fiction is going to be probably the next book to come out, even before the memoir. But yeah, I love fiction because, and it's what I studied at Mills College. I went there asking to write creative nonfiction, but the term wasn't that common yet. And so they said, well, we don't know what that is exactly. We teach fiction, And so I said, okay, I'll study that. And it's good to learn fiction techniques for any kind of writing.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Ask you how it hasn't affected or impacted, influenced your nonfiction writing.
Yeah, definitely has influenced it, because there's so much good teaching about fiction, like thinking of the protagonist and the barriers he or she has to face. It's then we can think about the experiences of our lives in that same way. Well, so what was that barrier? How do I describe that? And what was my inner conflict? What was my outer conflict? All those teaching tools that instructors use around fiction, at least I've been able to apply them to creative nonfiction. And so,
I think most people who are not from the West have an image of it that's probably very different than the reality of it. And I really don't know if you're not from here, or haven't been here for a very long time, you can appreciate the role that water plays in the West. The settling, which I hate that frickin' word when you talk about the West, but the pathway to what the modern world is here in the West was really not about gunfights and cows as much as it was about water and water rights and
Mhm.
water, controlling inland seas, controlling the spread of rivers, etc. So that's one of the reasons I think that writing like yours, when I read it, it's really appealing to me. But of course, now we're dealing with something greater than all of us, which is climate change. Um, this is going to sound really cynical, and I guess I'm feeling a little cynical about the world today. But how would you categorize our situation now? I mean, I guess bluntly, are we just screwed, or do we have the willpower? I know we have the capability, but do we have the willpower to actually stop climate change, change the inevitable scenario of what happens if we don't do something?
It's a terrible thing to think about. And in fact, I highly recommend a book called Don't Even Think About It, about this very question, which studies um, the human the human psyche with regard to the very unique problem of climate change, how we perceived it as slow moving. So it's like we don't really respond to things that are slow moving. We got to handle the thing that's right in our face. That's human nature. Also, we're very tribal, and if there's pressure to not talk about it at a party, then we're not going to talk about it at a party. um, we don't want to be the crazy lady that they leave out on the road because the tribe has to move on. It's the problem of climate change is uniquely suited to not being dealt with by humans. And that's what this book, Don't Even Think About It, is about. And so as I think, yes, we can we can't stop climate change now, but we can make the outcomes less onerous. And you hear that all the time. And we could do it today if we did have the will. And but altruism isn't a natural human quality. It's not something that is evolutionarily selected for. So the altruistic among us are just the people who just get trampled. I mean, sorry, I think that the way I think about it now is there are some really great minds who've said what we need to do. Read the Paul Hawken list of 10, of what we can do, and read Bill McKibben, what we can do. In fact, he just published in the New Yorker about what we can learn about the climate battle from the battle to save the Grand Canyon. It was going to be damned. It was saved in the 11th hour, and the way it was saved was by the passionate few cut in a deal with the powers that be to save this place that we knew, just like this earth, we know this is the only thing like it in the universe. At least that's what we know so far. And we knew the Grand Canyon was the only place like it on earth. And so I think as these great conservationists like Bill McKibben and Paul Hawken write about it, if we can do that to the best of our ability, we have to support President Biden when he says, look, here's the deal. We can't just build new bridges and roads. We've got to make this about climate. We've got to come out behind him 100%, and it's not enough to just put him in the White House, although that was really, really helpful.
Yeah.
It's a matter of talking about it. Again, I think language, how we language it, it's our time. This is the time that we were made for. And so if we can remember that, there's not a lot of hope at the moment about it. Yes, it's pretty bad when you see, the way when the pandemic was over, it was like, okay, great, let's leap back in the planes and start burning the carbon again. In fact, why don't we let some billionaires go to space and burn the really most highly refined jet fuel we can manufacture? This is a good idea. So I think it's a tough one, but no matter, if you ever hear someone say, oh, there's no hope, say, well, actually there is, and here's a list, and just be that person who speaks up.
I admire that. I admire your positivity. You're better than, but see, that's the power of knowledge. So if you have that, it's easier to find the path forward. Without it, you seem to constantly be mired in the muck of now, and that's a better way to look at it. We're close on time here, so I only have one question, and this is a question I throw at everybody. It's my standard closing question, which I mean to be fun and somewhat lighthearted. Let's just say I had the power to put you together with just one of the following three people for a conversation, dinner, drinks, a guide down the river, whatever would work for you. You mentioned one of them earlier that I had down here. One was John Wesley Powell. Your other two options would be John Muir or the great Rachel Carson. Of those three, who, if I could put you together with one of them, who would you choose and why?
I think I'd like John Muir the best, and maybe have a lot to talk about with Rachel Carson. But I really want to spend some time with John Wesley Powell and talk the rapids over a little bit. Say, okay, so this was the one where you guys lost the barometer and had to go rescue it. So I just ran that in a rubber ducky, and this is what the boat looks like. And, just have some cross-time narrative about what the actual journey was like and how much it's changed since he went down. And maybe ask him a few questions about what it was like to be at the Battle of Shiloh and lose his arm, but mostly also pick his brain a little bit about where he got, that how he came to that really brilliant observation about the West can't be settled unless you settle the water, and say, man, you were right, and look what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% there. Well, Becca, thank you very much. We're definitely out of time. As always, I tend to chat a little long. See me over here looking at my clock, but I really appreciate it. I highly recommend anybody watching this, if you're not familiar with Rebecca's work, please become so. I think, especially if, like me, you love the outdoors, and I spend an awful lot of time in the outdoors, and it's definitely my sanity place in the world. I hope it is for all of us, so that we protect it. I notice now, every time I go out on a trail, it seems like there's 10 times more people than there used to be. So maybe if there's any positive of the pandemic, it's that people have rediscovered that nature is a wonderful place, and also that it really does. We can love it to death. So let's not do that, and let's be kind to it. And one of the ways you can do that is learn more about it. And Rebecca's books are a great place to start. So thank you very much. Again, I appreciate it. For Rich Ehisen, this is the Open Mic, and join us here on a regular basis to hear really interesting people, far more interesting people than me, talk about great things, and you might even learn a little something. I know I do every week. So thank you again, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rich. It's been a pleasure.